Okay, we will begin with looking at argument, definition of argument and the types of arguments there are. What is an argument? It involves a claim. It's the practice of justifying a claim. Reasons are the justifications we give for claims. Arguments draw on rhetoric, concern with audience. That's the part of rhetoric that arguments draw on. It's concerned with audience and focuses on how speakers and writers develop and communicate knowledge. It's also connected with logic. And there are two types of logic, formal and informal. We will look at formal, but the ones we really care about more is informal. It's concerned with the structure of reason. Basically, formal has what they call syllogisms. And we'll talk about those more later on. Dialect, that has to do with language, right? A series of questions and answers. Testing knowledge through questions and answers. And the last one is ethics. Okay? So there are 5 key assumptions for an argument, right? The first one is argumentation is audience dependent. Okay? So we need an audience, basically, when we argue. Argumentation takes place under conditions of uncertainty. Okay? We'll talk about these furthermore and more complete and the next after we introduce them, right? Argumentation involves justification, not proof for a claim, but justification. We know that we also need proof, but we are looking at argument. Argumentation is fundamentally a cooperative enterprise, right? So if you have an audience, right, there has to, when you're arguing, there has to be, we have to come to a kind of agreement, right? So it has to be cooperative. And the last one is argumentation entails risk. And we'll talk about that. Let's start the first one. First key assumption is argumentation is audience dependent. It takes place with an audience in mind, right? We want to try to convince somebody. We are talking to somebody. We are arguing in front of somebody. The audience is the ultimate judge of the success or failure of an argument. Examples. For example, the Federalist Papers were written for a specific purpose, to influence voters in New York to vote to ratify the new government constitution, written with an eye to what was in the mind of New York voters. That's Federalist Papers. These were some documents written during the time of formation of the U.S. For example, another example could be the Lincoln-Douglas debate. It was written for the swing voters of Central Illinois who were both opposed to slavery and opposed to immediate abolition of slavery. Now, when you think about the swing voters are people that are in between, right? That might go one way or the other. And in this case, these swing voters, they were opposed to slavery, but they were also opposed to immediate abolition of slavery because slavery wasn't getting rid of it. It was an economic decision. It could affect people when you get rid of something like that so fast. Not that it was good. It wasn't good, right? But getting rid of slavery, it was a big deal because a lot of people had money invested, right? Unfortunately, it was in human life, right? And so, but this debate happened with Lincoln and Douglas, right? Abraham Lincoln and Douglas. Douglas described Lincoln as an abolitionist, so that was his his way of describing Lincoln. And Lincoln described Douglas as wanting to spread slavery everywhere. So that was their reasons, right? That they used. The second key assumption is that argument takes place under certain conditions of uncertainty, right? That means things that are certain are potentially uncertain, right? They have to be uncertain, are potentially controversial. Nobody argues things that are certain. Well, we only like to argue things that are uncertain, that we don't know, we haven't decided about, and it's very difficult to decide, right? We don't argue about things that are certain, just like I just said. For example, when life begins, we don't know. So then when we argue about abortion, it's a problem that we argue, people don't agree because nobody knows exactly when life begins, right? Of course, there are other reasons in there, right? There's the religious people but still, one of the big arguments is that, well, is it abortion if life is not really there, right? So then when does life begin? And it's an uncertainty. So that's a good topic to argue, right? Controversy can be implicit or explicit. Right? You can say it out loud or it can be inferred. Right? Controversy can be unmixed, one maintains a position, or both parties maintain a position, right? It can be single, you can make one claim, or it can be multiple. You can make two or more claims. The third key assumption, argumentation involves justification, right? Not really proof, but for a claim. But we're probably going to talk about proof later on because some people use a lot of proof. But normally at least you want to have a justification. You don't really need proof if you can justify something, right? For example, arguments needs reasons, not proof. Okay, they also need a critical listener. They're the ones who are going to decide. First example, what did the founding fathers believe about the question of slavery? If we're talking about the Douglas-Lincoln debate, we can look at this, right? What did the founding fathers believe about the question of slavery? So Douglas, justification, right? He doesn't have proof, but he might, because maybe the founding fathers were not explicit, right? So Douglas makes this assumption, right? This idea that many of the founding fathers were slave owners, so they probably would not oppose it. So he's using a justification, right? But he doesn't really have proof of what they really thought. But he's saying, well, they had slaves, so maybe they did not oppose it. Lincoln's justification, he looked at what the founding fathers did or what they wrote, right, in the Constitution, where all men were created equal. So if all men are created equal, then just Lincoln is saying that they probably did not agree with owning people, right? Of course, those things, they're more complicated, right? As we look into the whole thing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, the fourth key assumption is argumentation is fundamentally a cooperative enterprise. Arguers share a common goal of reaching the best possible decision under the circumstances. All right, you want to agree. You want to make sure you're making the right decision. Arguers are critical listeners. You are willing to listen, maybe learn, right? And those who disagree will always share some common agreements. Even if you disagree with somebody, there's still a common ground, what we call common ground, where you and the other person maybe agree, right? Arguers share a common language, or an argument will not succeed, right? They share a posture. You have to come to an agreement, right? It's a cooperative enterprise, so you have to agree somewhere. The last one is the fifth key assumption is argumentation entails risk, right? There are many risks in argumentation. The first one is the risk of altering one's systems of belief, right? You have your beliefs. Maybe somebody might convince you otherwise. So that means you run a risk of changing what you believe in, right? The other one is the risk of being wrong. When you argue, if you don't win the argument, then you're wrong, right? So then you run the risk of being wrong. And basically that would be, right, it.